I'm going to open it up to you. We'll go for about 20 minutes or so. As these discussions go, we'll quit while we're ahead, and if you get bored, I might have to rile you up a little bit, just for fun. But I want everyone to speak, whether you are an academic, whether you're white, black, poor, admin, staff, doesn't matter. I want everyone to speak as plainly as you want. Tell me whether you feel at home in this space. Tell me what makes you uncomfortable. If you right now want to say something, but you're scared of putting your hand out because you think, I can't speak English fluently, but I have this thought, tell us what you are feeling. One of the coolest things about having me on radio is that you get paid to say what's in your head. If you feel like not being at work, you could even start a conversation about what does one do when you get home or to work and you don't feel like being at work. So I want to hear exactly what you're thinking, because this conversation should not be, I don't want to say intellectualized, but it's a real, deeply personal conversation. Do you feel at home in the UJ space? What does it mean to you? But also, if you want to get into the slightly theoretical issues that bear on the practicalities, I'd like you to reflect on the big questions of the book as well. What is the point of a university? Is it appropriate to want to feel at home? Which is something I want to ask the panelists about a little bit later. So we can dive into the fundamental questions at the heart of the book in terms of its framing. But I also am very happy for you to just share your thoughts about your university experience, about being here, whether this has turned out to be an escape from a village, or whether you've come here and been compounded by experiences that are more troubling than being at home in a different space. Okay, and like I said, I will give away a book to anyone that I deem to have made a good intervention. But please, anyone is allowed to speak. I'll recognize a couple of hands. I've only got one request. Try to be un-South African and keep it very short, but to the point. Okay, the gentleman in pink, and then I'll come to you, sir. Are there any women in the house whose voices must be heard? And then I'll come to the lady there in white. Yes.
I've written my question down. The racial categorization ranging from whites, blacks, Indians, and coloreds was institutionalized by the apartheid regime in 1948. Chapter 1 of the South African Constitution claims that its foundation is non-racial and non-sexism. Why then are the tertiary and other institutions still using the very same racial category? And what can be done to reverse it, because it brings about division in university? That clearly states that I feel uncomfortable.
Thanks for that question. Just by way of noting, anyone can answer that question. I personally nominate Pedro, because to some extent, Pedro, you and I spoke more bluntly about racism. Is racism something individuals in the universities must take responsibility for? And how do we deal with it? And I know you've got some fantastic thoughts on that.
Thank you, sir. My name is Philip Nkuta, the chairperson of SARS Squared, the next door campus. We usually call it Baghdad here at UJ. It seems to be an island on its own. But no, it's fine. Yes, I wanted to ask a question on commodification of higher education. You will know the class differences, who affords, who doesn't afford. But I wanted to ask it in the context of how the universities are using the institutional autonomy to decide who to teach, how many to teach, what to teach. You'll take Cape Town University's perspective on the race quota that they use. So I think that was my question.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have two very quick questions. The first one is, what do these transformation units do? They exist in all universities. Besides have these very nice roundtable discussions, what do they do? In this university I'm standing in right now, there's a race called Dromedaris. It's named after some ship that came in, with Jan van Riebeeck. What do they do? The second question is, why do we downplay gender transformation? I mean, often we speak very openly about race, we speak openly about, popping out all these capitalists in universities, but why do we downplay the fact that we don't feel safe in our institutions? Why do we downplay the fact that universities pop out rapists and women beaters? We downplay the issue of gender transformation, and I think we need to speak to that.
By the way, if you are tweeting, the hashtag, especially for this hot Q&A, is being at home. If anyone starts the hashtag Dromedaris must fall, don't attribute it to me. Because you're doing so well by being pithy, obviously UJ is the place where you learn to communicate. I'll take a couple more before I give the panelists a chance to engage you. I want to hear your stories as well. I think some of you are subtweeting feelings in the form of a question. 1, 2, and then someone from, the cheap seats in the corner. I'll come to you.
My name is David Maimela. I'm from Mistra. Should racism be punishable by law in this country, given the history that we have? That's the first one. The second one, is it possible to achieve a post-racial society? And what will it look like, and how will it be constituted? The last one is a quick comment that says, I think we are yet to have an honest, thoroughgoing, factual conversation about race, racism, and racial relations in this country. The only time we have conversations about race in particular, which is one aspect of exclusion, by the way, in the university domain. The only time we have a conversation about race is when you've got Rhodes Must Fall. It's when you've got the Raids hostel incident. It's when you've got Kuro, poor kids who, little kids that don't even see color at that age, are made to be little racists. So I'm saying, when are we going to have a deliberate conversation to actually disrupt and confront these things? But beyond the conversation, my last bit, beyond the conversation, then the question should be, what is to be done? Because we can't talk only. There should be a question that says what is to be done, and we should all collectively respond to that.
Thank you.
Or just perish together.
Thank you, David. Withdraw your finger, comrade.
Thanks for the book. It's quite interesting. We currently also working on a book, Personal Narratives of Black, African, Colored, Indian academics in South African universities. And we're sharing our personal experiences of lived experiences of universities in South Africa. And Samantha, when you started talking, it threw me. You said you were comfortable in the university. And I think I was born to be an academic, but I was born in the wrong body. I was born as a black female, and therefore I am unable to be comfortable in the university. I was not comfortable at VES as a student. I was not comfortable at VES as a staff member. I am unfortunately still not comfortable as a staff member at UJ. I am in the wrong body. So the question is, I left VES because I was tired of fighting. I was tired of feeling like I don't belong. I came to UJ, I ran to UJ, but it seems like I must run again. The problem is I am going to take myself with me. I am going to take this female black body with me. So what am I to do to belong? Everywhere I look, people like me they have the wrong accent. I have the wrong accent as an academic. As a lecturer, I have the wrong accent. Therefore, some students walk out. I am left feeling unworthy. I am left feeling wrong. I will not belong. I will not belong as long as my being is being made to feel wrong.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
My question will be based on the fact that institutions usually invest a lot of money in making the institutions a better place for the students. What I may highlight right now is that while I was in high school, I was not good in an English language, and then one of the motivations that my English teacher used to give to me is that a higher institution learning place is going to be a place whereby it's going to be a place of diversity. So she emphasized that me having to learn English would be of benefits to me. But to my surprise, when I came to UJ my first year, I was in TFC, and then for the whole year, I never experienced a diversity, whether in race and culture, up until I got to visit other campuses, like for example, Auckland Park, Kingsway campus. And I got to see that actually diversity does exist in a higher institution learning in South Africa, as the book refers to. So now my question is that up until almost the end of my experience in the university, I never got to personally get to experience diversity in terms of culture and race in the university. So my question is that what interventions are there from the university in order to better the diversity of institutions? Because seriously, by right now, since I'm soon supposed to be an alumni of the university, but so far I haven't had any experience of diversity as I was foretold before I came here. So what interventions are the university planning to do in their institutions at the moment?
Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your honesty. I will in a second recognize the second round. Thank you, comrade. I'm in charge. Call me Baleka Mbete. I want to give, so you see that's how you take over institutions. I want to give firstly Salim a chance to respond to your incredibly magnanimous comments and questions. Thank you.
Those are vital questions, and it's impossible to do justice to what you've raised. And all I can do is just flag some issues. I certainly don't have the answers to all of these questions. But I think the whole question of racial categorization is vital. I think all too often those apartheid categories are used much too glibly. They're not troubled. And to what extent are we perpetuating stereotypes and caricatures, and that kind of thinking is something we need to deal with in concrete ways. And I think it's important to make the distinction that racism, prejudice, and racism, as well as its structural components, not just interpersonal relationships, not just overt forms of racism, but also the thing the book deals with, the insidious, the subtle, the intractable forms that we feel and we sometimes can't identify. All of that is real. Race as a biological category is absolutely nonsense. It's something we should have learned from Nazism and the Verwoerdian kind of thinking. Race as a social construct is real, absolutely. And I think the distinction is important. Now, when you fill in those forms, and you are asked in my faculty and my university and other universities which box you must tick, it does violence to where I come from politically. And when I'm told you can't be an NRF-rated researcher because it chucks out your document if you don't tick the box, it annoys me. Now, I think that the justification for the categories is around affirmative action, it's around historical redress, but there are ways of using other categories. And quite often, if you just use racial categories, you're not dealing with the real problems. There are enough sons and daughters of the black middle class today, of Patrice Motsepe and Cyril Ramaphosa, etc. And what does one deal with? I mean, Neville Alexander and others had this big debate with Max Price at UCT, Crane Sudine, and they came up with some fascinating responses. I mean, we now have quintiles in this country based on the socioeconomic profile of school communities, for example. Class, whether you're the first person in your family who has gone to a university, around gender, rurality, all of those things are quite important. Just, I'm going to rush through the others. There's no time to do justice to them. The whole thing about Baghdad reminds me about one of the articles which talks about the discursive and the material. I mean, in the Sudin report, it's that ministerial committee with a very long name about racial discrimination, social cohesion, etc. I mean, this university, many students distinguish Bollywood with Nollywood with Hollywood, right? The different campuses, etc. And that says a lot. We are still dealing with this. I mean, the dromedaris issue is very real as well. We need to challenge that. You know, there is the official transformation unit, and I know the people there, I work very well, and they are grappling, they are trying, they are open to ideas and suggestions, and of course, there is much more to be done. By the way, just as an aside, some of the issues on transformation that doesn't feed into the knowledge economy are the ones that get cut first. And rankings, by the way, we all want to compete with each other in the universities as the highest ranking one. The rankings trumps issues of social justice. We have the Sol Kerzner Center there. You know, he's one of the funders of the university. They say, behind every great fortune is a great crime. I'll stop there. But at the same time, we have at the UJ Soweto campus, we have Robert Sobukwe, Steve Biko, etc., etc. So, you know, it's a bit more complex, but I think the fact that we have those names, etc., we need to trouble that. We need to transgress that. We need to ask questions. There's a sanctioned, official kind of imbizos that the VC and others have, but from the ground, those kind of challenges are even more valuable. I believe, and we need to use that. Oh God, I think I should stop there. This is fascinating.
That was a buffet of insight. Thank you so much. Samantha, I'll give you a chance to respond to any. You don't respond to everything.
Yeah, I can't possibly respond to everything, even if I wanted to. I think one of the harms and the ongoing legacies of apartheid is that we're stuck with odious categories. We can't really try to fix problems without being forced into using some of those categories, as you suggested. If we're going to have affirmative action or other kinds of transformative policies, we have to know the race of people. And it's odious. We don't want to be identified with something like race, which, as you said, is biologically unreal. It is unfortunately socially, politically, economically, culturally still extremely real. So I think there are practical reasons to keep racial categories right now, and political and restorative reasons. And yeah, I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten it, so I'll leave it and not pretend. All the universities I've had anything to do with are really trying hard. They are centers for institutional transformation. I don't know why it hasn't translated into more obvious successes yet. I just don't know. I mean, part of the notion of institutional racism and institutional culture is to try and give us another term to explain why there's such intransigence when it comes to transformation. That it's something in the systems. People are well-meaning, people have good intentions, but once you get stuck into a system that takes on a life of its own, and I don't fully understand that concept yet or see how it works, but there seems to be something of interest going on there. So I can't answer those questions. In many ways, universities do reflect the cultures that we are in. We are in some ways more liberal, we're more educated, but if people are coming from cultures and families that are racist, that are violent towards women and children, that are violent towards homosexuals or any kind of difference, that's going to come into the universities, right? We can't change universities in a vacuum. You have to be changing the societies and the people before they come to the universities as well. You can't blame everything on a university. And a university, remember, can't do everything either. Universities are not governments. Universities are not corporations. They're not businesses. They have to be allowed to have a fairly limited scope. So don't think that a university can change the world. It can't. Got to do some changing outside the world as well.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that,
Yeah.
Sam? I think that's true. But do you think that at an individual level, heads of department, let's break it down practically, lecturers, think critically about what it means to make their own spaces, curricula, teaching methodology, such that a student who is not a mother tongue speaker may feel at home? Why does it take a North American philosopher to become a true South African in the name of Thaddeus Metz? And for the first time, Ubuntu is taken seriously as a philosophy worth teaching and thinking about. The rest of the universities, including our beloved alma mater that I love, the philosophy department, I'd spent many lovely years there, but essentially you'll get taught Plato, Immanuel Kant, formal logic, epistemology, and all of those things are crucial. They're good for your education as a philosophy student. But it's almost seen as letting down the subject if you should dare to teach philosophy of race, if you should dare to ask questions about the body politics in the philosophy department. And I pick on my subject only because I'm most familiar, but he generalizes. So while Salim talks about institutions, I know Pedro does as well, at least we did telephonically, isn't it important to make the individual lecturer and HOD feel that they have agency, because the idea of an institution can often let them off the hook?
Yes, thanks. So there's a lot I agree with there, Eusebius. I think it might be a little bit unfair to the people that I work with. You must remember, and this is not an excuse, but it's partly an explanation, that we teach and research things we're learnt ourselves. I'm not going to teach something I know nothing about. And if you come through a system that's taught you certain things, that is what you're going to be good at, and that's what you're going to be teaching. So we need to be getting people into the system who came out of a different system. And as I said, this is not an excuse. Most of the departments I have anything to deal with now are really trying. We do talk about curricular development. Most philosophy departments have African philosophy components. The problem, of course, is whether if those are just considered add-ons, where the core curriculum is not changing as well. I take that to be a really serious challenge. And Pedro and I and some other people are trying to do some serious thinking about at the level of curriculum as well. But you must remember that there's a group of people in the system who are trained in a certain way, who know certain stuff and don't know other stuff. And that might be culpable ignorance on our part. Okay, I'm accepting that. But there's some explanation there.
Okay, so I'm going to leave Pedro to keep it short. Just respond to one thing. Please, this is very important. It will impact the way you will feel when you walk out. So if you're tempted, unless you have a commitment, just stay on. I'll take one more round, and then we'll quit while we're ahead, and we can have a little bit of a social and just interact more informally, okay? So I'll beg your indulgence. I think this is critically important. I won't pursue that with Samantha, other than to subtweet a response by suggesting that when Thad came here, and I'm doing it for the sake of the wider debate, Thad didn't come to South Africa as a specialist in Ubuntu. He asked himself what he can do with his skill set to think about issues in the new environment he finds himself in as an alien. Pedro.
Yeah, again, this is consistent with what I said earlier about the concerns that I have with institutional culture. I think one of the approaches that I think we shouldn't have when we think about institutional culture is the approach of someone, and here I'm responding in part to David's question, is primarily the stance of someone who's there to punish people who violate. The reason I say that is because I think a lot of things that happen under the bonnet of a lot of people, and I think the model that we should use is the model of psychoanalysis, or the model in which we try to understand the underlying motive, stuff that's hidden from view. And I see that so much in academic institutions, and I see it in the life of people in South Africa. Often when I'm looking through, I had 3 years of very interesting, upward, super high learning. My first 3 years in South Africa, in the South African University at the University of Pretoria in 2001 to 2004, I think it was. And I just saw weirdness. I didn't see people holding theories about race, holding theories about how the world should be. There may be some weirdos who hold that view, but the underlying stuff has to be there before to get the weird stuff going, right? I just saw weirdness. I saw extreme weirdness. And I see it over and over again. One of the weirdest episodes I had, which taught me to think about racism and race in different ways, is an episode I had. I probably got here, I was in South Africa for 2 weeks. I went to a conference in Stellenbosch, and a beggar approaches me. I come from a country where there are lots of beggars, so I'm not used to that. And the man calls me master. Now that's the first time in my life anyone ever calls me master. I didn't even know that this sort of word was in use anywhere. And my reply, which I think was wrong, was the reply of someone who condemns. I said, "Don't call me master." And his reply is important. He said, "Yes, master." That was his reply. Now that you can say, oh, well, that's a poor beggar who doesn't have any education. Actually, I don't think that's the case. I think that weirdness cuts across race and social class. It just manifests itself differently. So I think if we're going to really try to address the issue of institutional culture, we should not come as judges ready to condemn. We should come as actually psychologists, as counselors who want to cure us of a disease, right? That's the primary locus. I'm not saying that obviously there'll be some militant racists who we have to condemn very explicitly, like the Afrikaans Studentenbond, maybe some, the Freedom Front, Prague. But these are extremely marginal cases. What sustained racism in this country, what sustains the institutional cultures in our university is not primarily those kooks. It's something else. It's something deeper and more that we need to look at much more carefully. And sometimes I think our categories, the categories that we usually use, including categories such as transformation, and even the category racism, has to be problematized in the sense of made more subtle, because it has many different manifestations. What a transformation amounts to, I don't think anybody has an extremely clear idea. I've been working on this topic for a while. I don't consider myself to be an expert. I still think this is an extremely puzzling and difficult thing to try to answer. We need to actually understand the difficulty rather than jumping onto some kind of bandwagon and trying to do something quickly. We need to do something carefully. We need to do it relatively quickly, but we need to do it carefully and lovingly.
Okay, thanks for that careful intervention, Pedro. We're going to start the debate.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.